Hello there, this is Mad Mike, and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to talk about something or at least we're going to talk about a film that I really enjoy from the comedy genre, and that's Blazing Saddles. And I'm also going to try to explain, I think, what Blazing Saddles has in terms of modern day relevance. So the film was directed by Mel Brooks, who famous comedy director, probably the best director in Hollywood in the comedy genre. I'd say maybe I'd put Harold Ramis on his level or close to it, but I'd still say Mel Brooks is my favorite. He has just a whole stable of films that are amazing. You have, from his early days, you had The Producers, Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles, of course, High Anxiety, Spaceballs, Robin Hood Men in Tights, and the list goes on. And he wrote the original screenplay for Blazing Saddles, I believe, in 1972. And he debated really whether or not to make the film because he wasn't sure if the film. He was concerned that the film would be too offensive to audiences. And really, the person that convinced him to make the film was Richard Pryor. And Richard Pryor read the script for Blazing Saddles and said, "Look, you have to make this. This is an amazing script. You can't just leave this somewhere. This has to be made. You have to do it." And that was enough to cause Mel Brooks to go forward and actually start making the film. But here's the thing, is that Blazing Saddles, the production was rocky, to say the least. Richard Pryor was originally coming on to play Bart, the Bart character, which would have been very interesting, I think, if he had actually gone on and played that character instead of the eventual person who played him, Cleveland Little. But the problem was, and this is actually kind of a funny story about the development, is apparently when they were going to discuss the contract terms with him, he showed up at the studio office where Mel Brooks was, and the studio head, and he proceeded to pour out a line of cocaine on the table, sniff it in front of the studio head, and then say, "Hey, let's make a movie." And that did not go over very well with the studio. They did not like that. And I think Mel Brooks in later years said that, oh, well, they just didn't like him because they knew he did drugs. But that story did come out a while ago. The validity of it is a little shaky, but it's still kind of a funny story. And then, of course, there was also another actor who was slated to play the Briscoe Kid, who eventually came in very, very intoxicated, and I guess he was a recovering alcoholic, and there were some issues with that, and eventually that character was replaced by the stable actor for Mel Brooks, which was Gene Wilder, who would go on to star in Young Frankenstein later that year, and he had also starred in The Producers before that. That really launched his comedy career. And ironically, he would also go on to star with Richard Pryor in a number of films through the late 70s and through the 80s. But then you also had the surrounding cast, which was filled out by Mel Brooks regulars, where you had Harvey Korman playing the Lieutenant Governor, Hedley Lamar, and then you also had Madeline Kahn playing Lily Von Shtupp, and trying to remember, there was a few other ones. Slim Pickens playing Taggart, of course, and Slim Pickens, I think many people will remember from Dr. Strangelove from 1964. But Mel Brooks had his standard cast of characters, a lot of actors that he had worked with in the past and that he would work with again in the future. And ultimately, everybody in that movie was hilarious at what they did, and the roles were perfect, the script was perfect, the timing was perfect. You couldn't have asked for a better comedy. And the story of it too is very interesting, where it's a black sheriff, or a black man who is working on the railroad, and he's due to be executed, but instead of executing him, they decide they can get some points with the Washington, D.C., and get a presidential bid for Mel Brooks' character, who plays the governor, and by making him the first black sheriff in the territory. And obviously this results in a lot of funny situations, considering this is a time when people are still extremely racist. There's a number of jokes in there, which obviously I can't repeat on YouTube. But the movie was a resounding success. It was part of why Mel Brooks was able to go on and make more of the movies that he made. that 1974 was a huge year for Mel Brooks, where you had Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein that both came out in the same year and were both amazing successes. Blazing Saddles more so, but still, both of those movies are instant classics in the comedy genre, and they are just amazing pieces. And here's the thing: if you haven't seen Blazing Saddles, you should go watch it. But back to the point is that even though Blazing Saddles came out in 1974, I feel like that film is still very relevant today, in the sense that today people tend to censor comedy. And that's not something that has really been done a lot in the past. I mean, it has been done. I mean, you saw some of the stuff with television and stuff like that, but there was never a thing where like they said, okay, in a stand-up routine, this is offensive. You have to apologize for this. It was just they didn't show you on television. You could say it. You could say it at a comedy club or somewhere like that, or if you're recording a special. People that used to record for HBO and stuff like that, they didn't care. But now people are calling for stand-up comedians to apologize for things that they say in their jokes. And look, now I know the difference between a dirty joke and bad taste. Bad taste is saying a Twin Towers joke on September 12th, 2001. That's bad taste. I mean, it's an extreme example of bad taste, but it's bad taste. A dirty joke is, three guys walk into a bar. Or a black guy, an Asian guy, and a Mexican guy walk into a bar. Bartender says, "Get the hell out!" That's a kind of a dirty joke. But people aren't able to enjoy comedy anymore. Or at least I shouldn't say people. A small group of people can't enjoy comedy, and they have to ruin it for the rest of us. Because here's the thing about comedy: is comedy should straddle that line of being socially acceptable and a little over the top, a little offensive. It should be able to straddle that line and go over one side or the other when it needs to. And that's what Blazing Saddles is. It straddles that line. And people misconstrue comedy nowadays that straddles that line. And some comedy goes a little beyond it. You see stuff that's done by Louis C.K. He tends to go over the line a lot. But he still remains funny. And he's very unapologetic about what he does. And obviously he had his scandal recently, and he's trying to make his comeback with comedy and stuff like that. But here's the thing: as long as you remain funny, you'll be fine. I mean, you might take some hits to your career, but you will inevitably be fine. But now we've seen stuff with the Kevin Hart situation where, look, I've seen the comedy special where Kevin Hart says the quote-unquote homophobic jokes that he says. And everybody laughed. It wasn't like people booed him off stage or demanded that he apologize right then and there. It was people 5 years later that said that, when he was going to host the Oscars, they said, you can't have this guy. Look at what he said. Look, he's a comedian. Why don't you look back at the Norm Macdonald when he hosted the Oscars in the late 90s? The opening monologue to that is brutal. Just watch it, okay? And it's a million times worse than anything Kevin Hart said. And it's still hilarious. But the point I'm trying to make is that I think people need to appreciate Blazing Saddles more, even now. I think now more than ever, because it is a prime example of what comedy should be. It is comedy that straddles the line, and it is comedy that is ultimately hilarious. And people need to just pay more attention to, look, it's meant to be a joke. It's meant to be funny. If you don't think it's funny, that's fine. You don't have to sit there and listen to it. But to say that person has to apologize for telling a joke is ridiculous. And if Blazing Saddles came out today, I have no doubt that you would hear an amazing amount of insanity from people like that, claiming that Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder and Cleveland Little and everybody else that was involved in the movie had to apologize, and trying to ruin their careers and destroy their families and sending them death threats and all that other crap that they tend to do nowadays whenever something like this happens. But here's the thing, is that Blazing Saddles is a message about racism, but not in a way that... See, here's the thing. There's been serious movies about racism before. You have movies like In the Heat of the Night with Sidney Poitier that's, a serious film. I believe he won an Oscar for that. You had movies like Mississippi Burning. Recently you had 12 Years a Slave, which was another one. And those are serious takes on racism, and they show the brutality of it. But here's the thing: is that people need to understand that just because you laugh at something that might not be politically correct, and I put that in quotations, that doesn't make you a bad person. That just means somebody told a joke that you thought was funny. And that's what Blazing Saddles is it's just a bunch of jokes about a quote-unquote taboo subject, which again, comedy straddles the line, so that's fine. And they're done in a very hilarious way. But Blazing Saddles, people would say that, if it came out today, people would say, oh, it glorifies racism. Oh, look at all the money this racist movie made. The entire message of the movie is the opposite of racism, because it's about a black man who rises through the ranks and becomes respected in society. That's literally the plot line of the film. And the bad guys lose, and he shoots the bad guy at the end. But people wouldn't look past that. People wouldn't actually look at the narrative. And this is me speculating, obviously, about what would be said, but based on the track record, we can guess that. But here's the thing that I think that people should do nowadays, especially with the younger generation. And if any of you people that are listening are young, and when I say young, I mean kids that are 16 to 20, let's say, and maybe a little younger, maybe let's say 14 to 20, people in that age range. If you haven't seen Blazing Saddles, go watch it. Appreciate it for what it is. Appreciate it for when it was made and the fact that it was made. And remember that just because comedy might be offensive to some people, that doesn't mean that it's not funny. It just means that you don't find it funny. And that doesn't mean that everybody is going to find it unfunny. And to ruin it for those people is not something that's good, because it not only does it ruin comedy as a whole, it ruins the foundation of free speech. And I don't want to go too much into that, but essentially that's what we're looking at nowadays with comedies. Comedies are becoming more and more clean, and they're becoming more and more they're becoming more and more safe, I guess is the word for it. And Blazing Saddles wasn't a safe movie when it was made. It is even more of an unsafe movie now. And I think to appreciate that is to appreciate what comedy actually is. So that's just my retrospective on that film, and it is one of my favorite. It is probably my favorite comedy of all time, with some other Mel Brooks movies right behind it. But tell me what you think in the comments. If you've seen it, if you haven't, and hit the like button and hit the bell for notifications. And remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?